The garden was Tom Larson's sanctuary. Every morning as the first light of dawn kissed the earth, he was already at work, his hands submerged in the cool soil of the Haverford estate. The crisp scent of freshly cut grass filled the air, the rhythmic sound of his gardening tools the only companion in the otherwise quiet world. He moved methodically as if each motion had been practiced 1,000 times. But today something was different. As his hands turned the soil, his mind was elsewhere. His gaze shifted for a moment toward the grand house behind him, its windows reflecting the golden glow of the rising sun. There was a time when he had been more than just a gardener here. There was a time when he had been part of this family, but that was a life he had long abandoned. Now all that remained was his role as the invisible man, the quiet worker who tended the roses and trimmed the hedges. No one here knew him as anything more, and that was how he liked it. He let out a sigh, wiping his brow as he knelt down to pull weeds from the flower beds. The breeze ruffled his graying hair, and for a moment, he allowed himself a rare moment of peace. But just as quickly, the sound of a car engine in the distance broke his reverie. He straightened up and squinted toward the driveway, where an unfamiliar vehicle slowly approached. Tom's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected anyone, especially not today. The car pulled to a stop, and out stepped a man Tom hadn't seen in years. David Carter, an old business partner from a life he had tried to forget. The man's presence was a jolt to Tom's system, a reminder of the world he had left behind. David was dressed sharply, his posture confident and self-assured, completely at ease in this place that had once been Tom's. As he walked toward Tom, the gardener felt the weight of the years between them, the silence stretching long and uncomfortable. "Tom," David greeted, his voice smooth, almost casual, as if they were old friends. "I didn't expect to find you here. Still hiding away, I see." Tom's heart raced, but his face remained expressionless. "What are you doing here, David?" he asked, his voice steady but laced with an edge of warning. David chuckled, glancing around at the estate. "I could ask you the same thing, my friend. I thought I'd catch up with you. It's been, what, nearly 15 years?" His eyes lingered on Tom for a moment too long, a knowing look in them, as if he saw something others couldn't. Tom's fingers clenched around the trowel, but he didn't move. He knew David wasn't here by coincidence. The man had always been good at sniffing out opportunities, and Tom's past had always been a convenient tool for others. "I'm just doing my job," Tom replied tersely. David stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You know, I thought I'd be the one to remind you, but it seems I'm not the only one who's noticed your little secret. It's been a long time, Tom. How long do you think you can keep hiding from the truth?" Tom's pulse quickened. The cryptic nature of David's words didn't sit well with him. He could feel the old anxieties creeping back, the constant fear of someone discovering what he'd done, who he really was. He had built his life in the shadows, and he intended to keep it that way. "Don't say another word, David," Tom warned, his voice low but firm. "You don't belong here anymore." David smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was a smile of someone who knew they held power over someone else. "We'll see how long you can keep that quiet. This family has a way of finding out everything eventually." He turned, heading back to his car, but not without one last glance over his shoulder. "Take care of yourself, Tom. You might want to make sure you keep things buried." Tom watched as David drove away, the sound of the car's engine fading into the distance. His breath came in shallow bursts, and his hands trembled slightly as he wiped the dirt from them. He stood there for a moment, his mind racing, his thoughts a tangled mess of past decisions and the fear of what was about to come. The letter he had received weeks ago still sat in his coat pocket, unopened. He had known this day would come, the day when someone from his past would return, the day when everything he had worked to bury would rise again. And now, it seemed, that day had arrived. His gaze fell once again on the house, and for the first time in years, Tom felt the walls closing in around him. The secret he had carried for so long could no longer remain hidden. Sophia Haverford sat at her desk, her fingers lightly brushing the edges of the family documents. The estate's finances, the family's history, and the complex web of relationships lay before her. but her eyes kept drifting back to the one name that had been haunting her thoughts. Tom Larson, the gardener, the man who had quietly worked for the Haverford family for years, and yet whose presence stirred a sense of discomfort she could no longer ignore. She had always trusted Tom, even admired his dedication, but something about him felt off. There were things about his past she had never questioned, but now, after David Carter's cryptic words earlier that day, Sophia could not shake the feeling that there was more to Tom than met the eye. The photograph of Tom she had found last week, unassuming, yet somehow strange, kept replaying in her mind. It had been tucked between old papers, as though forgotten. In it, Tom looked younger, smiling alongside her late husband in a way that was far too familiar. But it wasn't just the photo that bothered her. It was the nagging feeling that Tom had been hiding something all along, something that could unravel the carefully constructed world she had built for her family. As she leafed through the papers again, trying to focus, her thoughts kept circling back to David's words. "We'll see how long you can keep hiding that secret." What secret was David referring to? Did he know something she didn't? Was there more to Tom's quiet life than she had ever realized? "Mother?" Emily's voice startled her from her thoughts. Sophia looked up to see her daughter standing in the doorway, concern etched across her face. "Are you all right?" Emily asked, stepping into the room. Sophia smiled faintly, trying to shake off the feeling of unease that had settled deep in her chest. "Yes, darling. I was just thinking about some family matters." Emily didn't seem convinced, but she didn't push further. Instead, she moved to sit beside her mother, her eyes scanning the papers strewn across the desk. "You've been distracted lately. What's going on?" Sophia hesitated for a moment, unsure how much to reveal. She had never been one to share her worries with Emily, but today felt different. Today, she felt the weight of everything she had kept buried for so long. "It's about Tom," she finally admitted. Emily raised an eyebrow, clearly puzzled. "Tom? What about him?" Sophia lowered her voice, as if speaking the words aloud would somehow make them more real. "There's something strange about him. I can't put my finger on it, but I think he's hiding something." Emily frowned. "Hiding something like what?" Sophia's gaze shifted to the photo again. "I don't know yet, but I plan to find out." Her daughter's expression softened, and she placed a hand gently on Sophia's arm. "You've always trusted him, Mother. Maybe you're just overthinking it." Sophia wanted to believe that, but there was a cold knot in her stomach that wouldn't let go. She had always trusted her instincts, and right now, they were telling her that something wasn't right. That evening, after Emily had gone to bed, Sophia found herself pacing the length of her study. The moonlight filtered through the windows, casting long shadows on the floor. Her mind kept replaying the conversation with David, the photograph of Tom, and the growing unease in her gut. She knew she had to get to the bottom of this, whatever it was. Without thinking twice, she picked up the phone and dialed Hank Turner's number, the family lawyer who had been with them for years. His voice on the other end was calm as usual. "Hank, it's Sophia," she said, her voice steady despite the tension building inside her. "I need you to look into Tom Larson. I think he's hiding something about his past." There was a pause on the other end. "Are you sure, Mrs. Haverford?" Hank's voice was cautious, but it held a note of concern. "I'm not sure yet," Sophia admitted, her voice tight. "But I can't shake the feeling that there's more to him than meets the eye." "I'll look into it immediately," Hank responded, his tone grave. Sophia hung up the phone, the uncertainty weighing heavily on her. The decision to investigate Tom felt like a betrayal, but she had no choice. Whatever was hidden, whatever secret he was holding, she had to know. For the sake of her family, she had to uncover the truth. As she sat back in her chair, staring out the window at the darkened garden, she felt a cold chill creep through the room. Tom's quiet life was no longer just an innocent mystery. It had become a threat, a shadow that loomed over everything she had worked for. The air felt heavier the next day. Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change, something she wouldn't be able to control. The thought of David Carter's visit still lingered in her mind, like a stone lodged in her chest. She had never liked David. He was a man who always made his presence known, a man who knew how to use the truth and twist it to his advantage. His sudden return was no coincidence. He was a reminder of the life she had carefully hidden, and now that life was clawing its way back to the surface. It wasn't long before the knock on the door confirmed her worst fears. When Sophia opened it, there he stood, David Carter, with his typical smirk and polished suit. He hadn't changed much since the last time she'd seen him. He was still the same man, the one who had left her with a heart full of regrets. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Haverford," David greeted, his voice smooth, almost too smooth. His eyes scanned the mansion behind her as if taking in the grandeur that he once helped build. Sophia tried to mask her unease with a polite smile. "David, it's been a long time." "Far too long," David replied, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. He didn't need one. He had always been a part of this house, even when he was no longer supposed to be. As he made his way into the living room, he couldn't help but comment, "Your home looks just as beautiful as I remember. It's almost nostalgic, don't you think?" Sophia closed the door behind him, her mind racing. What does he want now? She wondered. The last time David had been in her life, it was before the secrets had grown too large to ignore, before the weight of the truth had torn apart everything she had worked for. "Why are you here, David?" Sophia asked, her voice barely concealing the tension. "After all this time, I didn't expect a visit from you." David settled into the armchair across from her, his expression casual, but the gleam in his eyes told a different story. "I came to talk," he said. "There are some things that need to be said, some things that need to be revealed." Sophia's heart skipped a beat. Revealed? The word hung in the air like a threat. "I'm listening," she replied, trying to keep her composure, though the unease inside her was growing. David leaned forward, his gaze fixed on her. "It's about Tom Larson," he said, his voice lowering as though sharing a secret with her. "You know, I've always found it curious that you trust him so much." Sophia's stomach clenched. "Tom?" she asked, her voice colder than she intended. "What about him?" David's smirk deepened, the kind of smile that only appeared when someone was about to drop a bombshell. "He's not who you think he is, not by a long shot." Sophia felt her breath catch. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, though she already had an inkling that this conversation wasn't going to end well. David stood up, pacing the room as if he were trying to piece together a puzzle. "You've been too blinded by your own pride to see it, Sophia," he said, his tone almost sympathetic. "Tom isn't just some gardener. He's a part of this family, whether you like it or not." Sophia's mind raced. What do you mean, a part of this family? She knew Tom had been with them for years, but this was different. David was implying something far more serious, something dangerous. David turned toward her, his eyes narrowing. "Tom, he's hiding his true identity, and you're letting him do it." His words cut through her like a blade. "You've kept him here, protected him, and for what? Because you want to believe he's just some humble servant?" He paused, watching her carefully. "I think you know there's more. There's always been more." Sophia stood, her pulse racing. "David, stop. What are you trying to say?" David walked slowly toward her, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Tom is a millionaire. He's been hiding his wealth for years, and he's been doing it because of you." Sophia felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. A millionaire? The words echoed in her mind, refusing to leave. She had always known there was something strange about Tom, his quiet demeanor, his willingness to stay in the shadows. But this was unimaginable. David watched her closely, reading her every reaction. "It's not just about money, though," he continued. "There's something deeper here, something you've been avoiding." Sophia could barely breathe. Why would he do that? Why would he hide who he is? David smiled almost knowingly. The answer to that is simple: fear. Fear of what you would do if you found out who he really is. Fear of what the truth might do to the perfect little world you've built. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Sophia couldn't speak, couldn't find the words to challenge what David had just laid out before her. She was trapped in a whirlwind of emotions: shock, anger, betrayal, and all of it centered on the man she had trusted for so long. David's final words hung in the air. "You've been living a lie, Sophia. and it's time you face the truth." Sophia watched him leave, the sound of the door closing behind him ringing in her ears. Her mind was in turmoil. She had always trusted Tom, always believed that he was someone to be relied on. But now, everything had changed. Sophia sat in the dimly lit study, the weight of the documents in front of her pressing down like a mountain. The figures, the assets, the debts, all of it blurred together in a haze of numbers she could no longer make sense of. Her family's once immense fortune was slipping through her fingers. She had spent years building and maintaining this legacy, but now it seemed that it was all unraveling. William stood across from her, his face drawn with frustration. "We can't keep doing this, Mother," he said, his voice sharp. "We need to face reality. The estate is sinking. You've been trying to protect this house for so long, but we don't have the luxury of time anymore." Sophia took a deep breath, trying to calm the panic that clawed at her chest. "I know," she replied softly, her voice tight. "But this is more than just money, William. This house, this estate, it represents everything we've built. I can't just sell it." William's gaze softened for a moment, but then his jaw tightened. "We may not have a choice. The creditors are breathing down our necks, and unless we sell off assets, we'll lose it all. Do you want that? To lose everything?" Sophia closed her eyes, her fingers trembling as she picked up another sheet of paper. It felt as though the walls of the room were closing in around her. She had always prided herself on her ability to maintain control, to preserve the family's legacy. But now, it was all slipping through her fingers. Her pride, her family's wealth, it was all at risk. "I won't sell," she said, more to herself than to William. "There has to be another way." William crossed the room to stand next to her, his face inches from hers. "Then tell me, Mother, what's the alternative? We've tried everything, but nothing's working. The estate, the gallery, it's all on the line now. The bank won't wait forever." Sophia's eyes welled with tears, but she blinked them away. "I won't lose it. Not after everything your father and I have done." William's frustration reached a breaking point. "This isn't about your father or even you anymore. This is about us, about what's left of the Haverford name. We need to act, and we need to act now. If you won't sell the estate, then there's only one other way to save it." Sophia looked up at him, confused. "What are you talking about?" William's face was hard now, his words cutting like a knife. "Tom." Sophia's heart sank at the mention of his name. "What does Tom have to do with any of this?" William's eyes were cold as he stared at his mother. "You've been hiding the truth about him for years, haven't you? He's been here working, living among us for all this time, and you never once told us who he really is. Tom Larson isn't just some gardener, Mother. He's a millionaire." Sophia's world tilted on its axis. The words reverberated in her mind like a loud, distant echo. A millionaire? She'd always known Tom was different, but she had never imagined it could be this. William's voice became more insistent. "If Tom has all this wealth, then why hasn't he stepped up? Why hasn't he helped us? It's time to confront him, Mother. He can save us. We need that money. We need him." Sophia's hands clenched into fists on the desk. Her body trembled not just with the weight of the situation, but with the shock of David's words echoing in her mind. Tom isn't just a gardener. How could this be true? How could she have missed this? She had trusted him for so many years, never questioning his motives, his quiet demeanor. She had thought of him as family. But now, she was faced with the reality of what his hidden identity could mean. She stood abruptly, the chair scraping harshly against the floor. "I need to speak with him," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. William raised an eyebrow, surprised by her sudden resolve. "Finally, but be careful. You don't know what else he's hiding." Sophia barely heard him as she turned and walked toward the door. Her mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Betrayal, confusion, anger, everything mixed together. Tom had been so close, so loyal, and yet for all these years he had been living a lie. And now this lie could destroy everything she had worked so hard to protect. As she walked toward the garden, her thoughts turned over and over, each step heavier than the last. She had always known something was off about Tom, but this was far more than she had ever imagined. She needed answers. When she reached the garden, she saw him standing by the rose bushes, his back turned to her, focused on his work. Her heart pounded as she approached. The moment she spoke his name, everything would change. "Tom," she called, her voice barely audible. He turned slowly, meeting her gaze. The warmth in his eyes was gone, replaced by a guarded distance. "Mrs. Haverford," he said, his voice steady, "what can I do for you?" Sophia's breath caught in her throat, her mind racing. This wasn't just about the estate anymore. This was about trust, about everything she had believed to be true and everything that was now falling apart. Sophia stood frozen in the garden, her heart racing as she looked at Tom. The afternoon sun was starting to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows over the rows of roses that Tom had meticulously tended to for years. But now, those roses seemed almost irrelevant in the face of the storm that was brewing between them. She had known Tom for so long, trusted him like a member of the family. He had been the quiet, reliable figure in the background, tending to the estate, always there but never asking for anything in return. But now, after everything David had said, after everything she had uncovered, she was faced with the realization that she didn't know him at all. Tom met her gaze, his face neutral, but Sophia could see the tension in his posture. He knew what was coming. He knew that this moment was inevitable, even if he hadn't expected it so soon. "Tom," Sophia began, her voice steadier than she felt, "I need to know the truth. What is it you've been hiding from me all these years?" For a long moment, Tom didn't answer. His eyes flickered, almost imperceptibly, to the ground, before meeting hers again. He wasn't ready to speak. Sophia could feel his reluctance, the weight of his silence pressing on her chest. But she couldn't back down now. Not after everything that had been said. Not after David's revelation. "You're not just a gardener, are you?" Sophia pressed, her voice breaking through the silence. "You're hiding something, and I need to know what it is." Tom finally exhaled, the sound heavy, as if he had been holding his breath for years. His eyes softened, but his expression remained guarded. "It's not what you think," he said quietly. "I never meant for any of this to come to light." Sophia felt a cold knot form in her stomach. "What do you mean? What aren't you telling me?" Tom took a step back, looking out over the garden as if he could find the words in the distance. But he didn't. Instead, he slowly turned back to her, the weight of his past heavy in his eyes. "I'm not who you think I am," he said, his voice thick with regret. "I wasn't always a gardener. I wasn't always this." He motioned vaguely around the estate. "I used to have everything. I had wealth, power, a life that I walked away from. I chose to leave it all behind." Sophia's mind spun. "Why? Why would you walk away from that?" Tom's gaze shifted downward, his hands clenching at his sides. "Because it wasn't worth it. Not after what happened. Not after I lost everything." His voice faltered for a moment, but he quickly regained control. "I didn't want to live that life anymore. I wanted peace. I wanted to disappear." Sophia's heart tightened at the pain in his voice. She had always known there was something more beneath Tom's quiet exterior, but she had never imagined it would be something so tragic. "You left everything behind?" she asked, disbelief in her voice. "Everything? Your wealth, your family, your future?" Tom nodded, his eyes distant, as though lost in a memory he couldn't escape. "I didn't just leave the money. I left my wife, my child, the life I had built. After the accident, I couldn't bear it anymore. The guilt, the shame. I thought disappearing would make it easier. I thought maybe I could start over, be someone different." Sophia's breath caught in her throat. "What happened?" she asked softly, her voice barely a whisper. Tom's eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of vulnerability. "My wife and my child," he began, his voice cracking. "They died in an accident. I couldn't save them, and the guilt was too much. I couldn't live with it, so I ran." Sophia's heart ached for him. The pain in his eyes was palpable, and she could feel the weight of the years he had spent hiding this truth. "That's why you've been here," she said quietly, the realization dawning on her. "That's why you never told anyone who you really were." Tom nodded, his expression filled with regret. "I didn't want anyone to pity me. I didn't want your sympathy. I just wanted to disappear, to be someone simple, someone who could blend into the background. But I should have told you, I should have been honest." Sophia stood in silence for a long moment, trying to process what he had said. The man she had known, the man she had trusted, was not the person she thought he was. He wasn't just a humble gardener. He was a man broken by loss, living in exile from a life he had once known. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the soft rustling of the leaves in the wind. Finally, Sophia spoke again, her voice filled with a mixture of compassion and confusion. "Tom, I don't know what to say. I never knew." Her voice trailed off as the reality of his words hit her. She had never imagined that the quiet gardener she had trusted with her family's home had been running from something so tragic. Tom shook his head, a bitter smile playing at the corners of his lips. "I never wanted your pity, Sophia. But I know now that hiding from the truth isn't the answer." Sophia took a step forward, her eyes softening. "You should have told me. We could have helped you." Tom's eyes met hers, filled with a sadness she had never seen before. "It was never about help," he said quietly. "It was about finding peace, and maybe now, for the first time, I'm starting to." Emily couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned in her bed, the conversation she'd overheard earlier replaying in her mind. The words her mother had spoken, Tom's hidden past, his wealth, the secrets she hadn't shared, kept echoing in her ears. For the first time, she felt like she was standing on the edge of something important, but she didn't know what it was yet. She had always trusted her mother's judgment. Sophia had kept their family together for years, managing everything with a grace that Emily admired. But now, after David's revelation and Tom's confession, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that there were too many unanswered questions. If Tom was hiding something, what else had her mother concealed? How deep did this web of secrets go? The sun had barely risen when Emily decided to act. She slipped quietly out of her room and headed toward the study, where her mother spent most of her mornings. The house was still and silent, and the only sound was the soft tap of Emily's shoes against the floor. She reached the study door and paused for a moment, taking a deep breath. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, but she knew she needed to find the truth. The study door creaked as she pushed it open. Sophia wasn't there, but the desk was cluttered with papers, old family documents, legal files, and photographs. Emily's heart raced as she scanned the desk, looking for something, anything that could shed light on the mystery. Her eyes landed on a photograph tucked under a pile of papers. It was a picture of Tom, much younger, standing next to her mother and father. They were all smiling, but there was something off about it. It looked old, decades old, and yet it didn't match the image of Tom she knew. He had always been the quiet, distant figure in their lives, never one to be in the spotlight. But this photo was different. This Tom looked at ease, like he belonged in that world. Emily's fingers trembled as she picked up the photo, her mind racing. What was this? Why had her mother kept this hidden? Her eyes moved to the legal files next to the photo. She quickly flipped through them, looking for anything that might explain what she had just discovered. But the more she read, the more confused she became. There were references to financial records, investments, and property holdings, but no mention of Tom. No mention of the man who had been with them for years, working for them, living among them. How could he have been so close to her family without her mother ever mentioning him? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the front door opening. Sophia's voice echoed down the hallway as she greeted a visitor. Emily quickly stuffed the photo and papers back into place, her heart pounding in her chest. She hadn't found anything concrete, but her instincts told her that there was more to this story, something her mother wasn't telling her. As Sophia entered the study, Emily pretended to be engrossed in the papers on the desk, but she could feel her mother's gaze on her as if Sophia knew that Emily had been poking around. "What are you doing in here, Emily?" Sophia asked, her voice tight, though she was trying to sound casual. Emily turned, forcing a smile. "Just looking through some old papers," she said, her tone light. "I wanted to see what you've been working on." Sophia's eyes narrowed for a brief moment, but then she softened. "It's not much, just some family matters I've been trying to sort through." Emily nodded, her mind racing. There was something in her mother's tone, something defensive, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. It only made her more determined to uncover the truth. "I think I'll take a walk around the estate," Emily said, standing up. "Clear my head." Sophia didn't seem to notice the tension in Emily's voice. "That's a good idea. Take your time," she said, turning to leave the study. As Emily stepped out into the garden, the cool morning air hit her face, but the sense of unease only grew stronger. She had always trusted her mother, but now she wasn't so sure. There were too many unanswered questions, and the more she thought about it, the more she realized that she wasn't just looking for answers about Tom. She was looking for answers about her entire family. What had Sophia kept hidden from her? What had been buried beneath the surface all these years? Emily walked slowly through the garden, her thoughts spinning. Her eyes kept drifting back to the house, to the place that had once felt like home, but now felt like a cage. She knew she couldn't stop now. The truth was out there, and she had to find it. The phone rang, its shrill tone echoing through the quiet house. Sophia picked up the receiver, already sensing that it wasn't just another ordinary call. "Hello?" she answered, her voice steady despite the uncertainty in her chest. "Sophia?" came the gravelly voice on the other end, sending a chill down her spine. "It's Richard." Her heart skipped a beat. Richard, her estranged brother, the man who had vanished from their lives years ago after a bitter fallout over their father's estate. His name was one Sophia hadn't uttered in years, and now here he was, reappearing without warning, like a ghost from the past. "What is it, Richard?" she asked, keeping her voice neutral, though inside she felt the tension building. "I'm coming to the estate," he said, the words blunt and final. "I need to speak to you." The line went silent for a moment, and Sophia's mind raced. What could Richard possibly want now? The last time they'd spoken had been during a heated argument over family matters, money, property, and control. He had walked away angry, and she had never heard from him again. And now he was calling to return? "Fine," Sophia said, her voice betraying none of her inner turmoil. "I'll see you when you get here." Richard hung up without another word. Sophia set the receiver down slowly, her thoughts swirling like a storm in her mind. She had known this day would come. The family's financial troubles had been escalating for months, and now Richard's return seemed inevitable. He had always been more driven by money and power than by any sense of family loyalty. It was no surprise that he would come back now, when the Haverford name was teetering on the edge of collapse. But there was something else. David's cryptic words about Tom kept playing in her head. Tom, the man she had trusted for so long. Could he really be the key to saving them? And if he was, what would that mean for her family? Before she had time to sort through the chaos of her thoughts, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway broke through her reverie. Richard was here. Sophia stood up, straightening her dress, and walked slowly toward the front door. When she opened it, she was met with the sight of her brother standing on the doorstep. His posture was rigid, his eyes cold as always. He had aged, but the sharp features that had always defined him were still there. "Richard," she said, her voice low, acknowledging the tension that lingered between them. He didn't respond immediately, his gaze scanning the estate with a calculating look. "It's been a while," he finally said, his voice flat. Sophia nodded, stepping aside to let him in. "What do you want, Richard?" He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I came to talk about the estate," he said, his words direct. "I've been watching your situation. It's getting bad, isn't it?" Sophia closed the door behind him, her pulse quickening. "I'm managing," she said, though her voice didn't hold the same conviction it once had. Richard glanced at her with a smirk. "Managing? Or pretending you can hold it all together while everything falls apart?" His eyes narrowed. "I'm here because you need my help. The estate is worth nothing without some major changes, and I think you know that." Sophia's grip tightened on the edge of the table. "I've worked too hard to keep this family's name intact. I don't need your help." Richard's lips twisted into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Don't kid yourself, Sophia. You can't do it alone. Not anymore. The debts are piling up and your little secrets are starting to catch up with you. This family is falling apart, and you're too proud to ask for help." The words stung more than she expected. Sophia had always prided herself on being the protector, the one who kept everything together. But Richard was right. Everything was unraveling. The pressure had been mounting for months, and now with Tom's secret hanging over her head, the walls felt as though they were closing in. "What do you want, Richard?" she asked again, her voice tinged with frustration. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I want a share of the estate. I want my rightful place in the family business, and I want to make sure the Haverford name survives. If you're willing to listen, we can make this work." Sophia's blood ran cold at the words. She'd always known Richard had his eye on the family fortune, but now, hearing him make such a bold demand, it sent a wave of anger through her. "You don't get to come back here after all these years and demand anything from me," she snapped. "You abandoned this family when it needed you most. Don't you dare think I'll just hand you a piece of what's left." Richard's face hardened, and for a moment Sophia saw the man he had become, the ruthless, calculating figure who would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. "I didn't abandon anyone," he said, his voice ice cold. "I walked away because you made it impossible to stay. But now I'm here to clean up the mess you've made. You've let everything slip through your fingers. I'm offering you a chance to save what's left." Sophia took a step back, her mind racing. Was she really in a position to refuse him? Could she afford to ignore the one person who could help save the family estate? And what would this mean for Tom? For the truth that had been buried for so long? "Think carefully, Sophia," Richard added, his tone low and dangerous. "Time's running out." The weight of the truth hung heavily in the air, suffocating Sophia as she walked through the halls of the family estate. The revelation that Tom had a child, his child, hidden from everyone, was something that rattled her to the core. It was a truth she had never even considered, yet here it was, staring her in the face, forcing her to question everything she thought she knew about the man who had been so loyal to her family. It was Emily who first found the evidence, the letters, the official adoption papers. Sophia had known something was off for years, but she had never suspected this. As she stood before the grand mirror in the hallway, staring at her reflection, she couldn't help but wonder, how many other secrets had Tom kept from her? From them all? How had he managed to conceal this part of his life for so long? And why had he chosen to keep it buried? The question gnawed at her, the need for answers becoming more urgent with each passing moment. She couldn't move forward until she knew the full extent of the truth. Not just for her own peace of mind, but for her family, for the legacy she had worked so hard to protect. As if on cue, there was a knock at the door. Sophia's heart skipped. She knew who it was before she even answered. She had been expecting this moment, though she had no idea how to face it. "Tom," she said softly, her voice strained as she opened the door to find him standing there. His expression was unreadable, but there was a tension in his shoulders, a wariness in his eyes that told her he already knew. "Mrs. Haverford," he said, his voice calm but laced with uncertainty. He had always addressed her with such formal respect, but today she saw something different in him, a vulnerability she hadn't noticed before. Sophia stepped aside to let him in, though she hesitated for a moment. This was it. This was the confrontation she had been avoiding, the moment when everything would change. "Tom," she said again, more firmly now, "we need to talk." He nodded, his eyes flickering with resignation, as if he had known this conversation was inevitable. They moved to the sitting room where they sat across from each other, the silence stretching out between them. "I found something," Sophia began, her voice steady but cold. "A letter, papers. They mention a child, your child." Tom's face tightened, and for the first time he looked almost ashamed. He didn't speak right away, as if gathering the strength to tell her what she already knew. "Why didn't you tell me?" Sophia asked, the hurt in her voice palpable. "All these years you've been here working for us, and you never said a word." Tom shifted uncomfortably, his eyes lowering to the floor. "I never meant for any of this to come out," he said quietly. "I didn't want to burden anyone with my mistakes. The child, she was part of my past, a past I thought I had left behind." Sophia's breath caught in her throat as she absorbed his words. "Your past," she repeated, her voice soft. "You mean the life you walked away from, the life you've been hiding from?" Tom nodded, his expression pained. "I didn't want to involve you. I didn't want to bring more trouble to your family. But I know now, it's not just about me anymore. I should have told you the truth." Sophia clenched her fists, trying to control the anger bubbling up inside her. "What else aren't you telling me, Tom?" she demanded. "How long have you known about this child? How long have you kept her hidden?" Tom hesitated, the weight of his silence filling the room. "I've known about her since she was born. I was there, but I couldn't keep her. She was given up for adoption to protect her from my life, from the danger I had put her in. I thought it was for the best." Sophia's head spun as she processed his words. A child, a secret daughter, taken away to be kept out of sight, out of mind. How could he have kept something so important hidden from her for so long? "And now," she asked, her voice trembling, "what does this mean now? Why are you telling me this now after all this time?" Tom's eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw a flicker of vulnerability in his gaze. "Because she's looking for me. She's grown up, and she's searching for her real parents, and I can't hide anymore. I can't keep running from my past." Sophia's chest tightened, a mix of emotions flooding her at once: betrayal, disbelief, and an aching sense of compassion for the man in front of her. She had always trusted him, always believed in his loyalty to the family, but this secret was bigger than anything she could have imagined. "She's coming here," Sophia whispered, a sense of dread creeping into her voice. Tom nodded, his expression grave. "Yes, she's nearby. I don't know when she'll arrive, but I'm afraid she'll bring everything to light. Everything I've tried to forget." Sophia stood up, her mind racing. What would this mean for her family, for the estate? Could she ever trust Tom again after all of this? The secret of the child was just the tip of the iceberg, but what lay beneath it? What other truths were hidden, waiting to be uncovered? As Tom stood there waiting for her reaction, Sophia realized that everything was about to change. The family's fragile balance was teetering on the edge, and the arrival of this child, the key to Tom's past, would be the final test of everything she had built. Tom stood in the garden, the weight of the conversation with Sophia still heavy on his shoulders. The sun had begun to set, casting long shadows across the roses he had carefully tended to for years. Each petal seemed to mock him, reminding him of the life he had abandoned, the secrets he had kept. His heart felt like it was caught in a vice, squeezed tighter with each passing second. The truth was out. Sophia knew now. The child, his daughter, everything was about to change. His past, his guilt, and the future he had tried so desperately to protect were now intertwined in a way that he couldn't escape. He had never wanted to hurt Sophia or her family. He had wanted peace, a quiet life away from the chaos he had left behind. But now, that quiet life seemed impossible. The family he had served loyally for years was on the brink of collapse, and his own secrets were like a ticking time bomb ready to explode. Tom's mind raced as he walked along the garden path, his thoughts in turmoil. What do I do now? Sophia's words from earlier echoed in his ears. She had been hurt, rightfully so. But there was something more in her eyes, something he hadn't expected. Fear. Fear of losing control. Fear of the truth that had been hidden for so long. He understood that fear. It was the same fear that had haunted him for years. But now there was no more hiding, no more pretending. The truth was here, and it was coming for him. He stopped walking, his gaze falling to the ground as he processed everything. His daughter, the one he had given up for adoption, was searching for him. She was close. He had tried to forget her, but now the past was catching up with him, and there was no escaping it. A voice broke through his thoughts. It was Clara, the housekeeper, standing at the doorway of the house, watching him with a concerned expression. "Mr. Larson," she called softly, "you've been out here for hours. Is everything all right?" Tom didn't answer right away. He wasn't sure if everything was all right. How could it be? The lie he had built for years was crumbling, and he didn't know how to stop it. Clara stepped closer, her eyes searching his face. "You're not yourself, sir. What's happened?" He took a deep breath, the weight of everything bearing down on him. "I've told her. Sophia knows." Clara's expression softened. "About the child?" she asked, her voice quiet. Tom nodded, his throat tight. "Yes, she knows everything now." Clara was silent for a moment, then placed a gentle hand on his arm. "You did the right thing," she said softly. "It was only a matter of time." Tom turned to face her, his eyes filled with confusion and frustration. "How do I know that?" How do I know what's right anymore? Clara met his gaze, her voice calm and steady. You've carried that burden for so long. It's not your fault. You did what you thought was best. But now, you have to face what comes next. You can't run from this, Tom. It's time to confront your past. The words stung, but he knew she was right. He had spent so many years running, so many years hiding from the truth. But now, the truth was inescapable. The sound of footsteps interrupted their conversation. It was Sophia, walking toward him with a look of determination in her eyes. Tom's heart skipped a beat as she stopped in front of him. You've been hiding from this for too long, she said, her voice low but firm. But it's time we face the truth together. Tom's breath caught in his throat. He knew what this meant. This was the moment when everything would change. There was no going back. I never meant for you to find out this way, Tom said quietly, his voice filled with regret. I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't want to destroy everything. Sophia's eyes softened, but there was still a flicker of fear in them. You didn't destroy anything, Tom. But I need to understand. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you trust me with the truth? Tom hesitated, his mind struggling to find the right words. I was scared, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I was scared that if you knew the truth, you would hate me. I was scared of losing everything. The life I had built here, the family I had come to care for. I didn't want to lose you. Sophia studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she spoke. I don't know what this means for us, for the family, she said, her voice thick with emotion. But I need to know one thing. Is she really your daughter? Is everything you've said true? Tom nodded, his eyes filled with a sorrow that cut deep. Yes, it's all true. She's mine. And now I have to face the consequences. Sophia's gaze softened, but there was a new understanding in her eyes. You've been carrying this weight alone for too long, Tom. But now, you don't have to do it by yourself. We'll figure this out, together. Tom felt a rush of relief flood over him, but it was quickly replaced by a new wave of anxiety. The truth was out, but the future was still uncertain. The family's legacy, his own future, everything was hanging by a thread. What would happen next? Would they accept him? Could they ever see him the same way again? Or would the weight of his past be too much to bear? The questions swirled in his mind as he faced Sophia, uncertain of what the future would hold, but knowing one thing for certain. There was no going back now. The weight of the conversation hung in the air long after Tom had spoken. His confession, the revelation of his daughter, and the truth about his past, all of it had shifted the foundation of everything Sophia thought she knew. But now, as they stood in the garden, the rawness of the moment began to settle into something quieter, something more fragile. Sophia took a deep breath, her mind reeling from everything she had just learned. She had spent so long keeping her family's legacy intact, shielding it from the world. But now, she was faced with the crumbling truth, and the question lingered. Could the family, the life she had worked so hard to protect, survive this? Tom stood there waiting for her response, his hands at his sides, his expression guarded but resigned. The silence between them felt suffocating, but it wasn't just the weight of the truth. It was the uncertainty of what came next. I need to understand, Tom, Sophia said finally, her voice calm but heavy with emotion. All of this, everything you've kept hidden. I need to understand why. Tom met her gaze, his eyes filled with a mixture of regret and pain. I thought I was protecting you, all of you. I thought by keeping the truth buried, I was sparing you the pain of my mistakes. Sophia's heart clenched. She knew that Tom's actions came from a place of love, but it didn't change the fact that his secrets had left a mark on her family. You didn't protect us, Tom, she said quietly. You kept us in the dark, and now we're all paying for it. There was a long pause as Tom absorbed her words. He seemed to shrink in front of her, the weight of his guilt bearing down on him. I know. I'm sorry. I didn't know how else to handle it. Sophia could see the anguish in his eyes, and a part of her softened. She had always trusted him, had always considered him part of her family. But this, This was a betrayal of the deepest kind. Still, she couldn't deny the sorrow that clung to him, the loneliness that seemed to have followed him all these years. "I understand why you did it," Sophia said, her voice quieter now. "But it doesn't make it right. You kept so much from me, from all of us. And now we have to face the consequences." Tom nodded, his shoulders slumping. "I know," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm here now. I want to make things right. I want to be a part of this family again." Sophia's eyes searched his face, her mind grappling with the enormity of what had been revealed. Could they move past this? Could she forgive him for the years of deception, the secrets that had torn them apart? Behind her, she heard the soft footsteps of Emily approaching. She turned to find her daughter standing at the edge of the garden, watching them both with a mixture of concern and curiosity. Emily looked from Sophia to Tom, her expression unreadable. "Is everything all right?" she asked cautiously. Sophia took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. The moment with Tom had opened old wounds, but now was the time to heal them. "No, Emily," she said softly. "It's not all right, but we're going to work through it, as a family." Emily didn't speak right away, but she stepped closer, her eyes never leaving Tom. There was something in her gaze, a mix of disbelief, hurt, and something deeper. "You've kept so much from us, Tom," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "For so long, and now everything's changed." Tom didn't look away, his eyes filled with sorrow. "I know, and I can't change what I've done. All I can do now is ask for your forgiveness and hope we can move forward." Sophia watched as Emily stood silently, taking in Tom's words. It was clear that her daughter was struggling with the truth, the sudden shift in everything she had thought to be true. But after a moment, Emily nodded, a small, reluctant gesture. "I don't know if I can forgive you yet," Emily said softly, her voice trembling slightly, "but I'll try. We'll try, because we're family." Sophia's heart swelled with a mixture of pride and relief. Emily wasn't ready to fully forgive Tom, but she was willing to try. That was all they could ask for right now. The path to healing would be long, but they would walk it together. The three of them stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the past heavy on their shoulders, but there was a flicker of something else, something new, hope. It wasn't going to be easy, they all knew that, but they had taken the first step. Tom broke the silence, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you," he said, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you for giving me a chance." Sophia nodded, her voice steady. "We'll work through this," she said, "together." And as they stood there in the garden, the first real sense of reconciliation began to take root. The past could not be undone, but they could move forward, one step at a time. The days that followed the reconciliation were tense, uncertain. For the first time in years, the Haverford family found themselves standing on a fragile line between healing and collapse. The secrets had been revealed, the wounds exposed, and now it was time to face the consequences. Sophia sat at the kitchen table, her fingers lightly tracing the rim of her coffee cup, her thoughts far away. Tom's daughter was coming. The truth had shattered everything, but Sophia wasn't sure if it was enough to break them. She had promised herself that they would move forward, but the weight of the past was still heavy on her chest. There were too many unknowns, too many things that could go wrong. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the front door opening. Emily had returned from her walk, her face a mix of exhaustion and resolve. Sophia could see the strain in her daughter's eyes. She knew Emily was struggling with everything. Struggling with Tom's past, with the family's secrets, with the possibility of what was coming. "Mom," Emily said quietly, sitting down beside her, "we need to talk." Sophia nodded, her stomach twisting. She had known this conversation was coming. The tension had been building between them ever since the revelations about Tom's past, and now it seemed that it was reaching its breaking point. "What's on your mind?" Sophia asked, trying to keep her voice calm. Emily hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I've been thinking a lot about everything. About Tom, about the family. I know we've agreed to move forward, but I'm scared. I'm scared of what's going to happen when she gets here." Sophia reached across the table, placing a hand over Emily's. "I'm scared too," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "But we can't let fear control us. We have to trust that we're doing the right thing. This is our chance to rebuild, to heal." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "But what if it's too late? What if everything's ruined already?" Sophia squeezed her daughter's hand. "We can't change the past, Emily, but we can control what happens next. We have to be strong for each other, for this family. We can't let the fear of the unknown stop us from moving forward." A heavy silence settled between them, both women lost in their own thoughts. It wasn't just about Tom anymore. It was about everything they had built together, everything they had fought for. It was about trust, family, and the fragile thread that held them all together. Just as the tension in the room seemed unbearable, the doorbell rang, sharp and sudden. Sophia's heart skipped a beat. "She's here." They both stood at the same time, as if instinctively knowing they had to face what was coming. Emily looked at Sophia, her expression full of uncertainty. Sophia gave her a reassuring nod, even though she was unsure herself. They both knew that this was the moment of truth, the ultimate test for everything they had worked to rebuild. Sophia opened the door, her breath catching in her throat. There, standing in front of her, was a young woman. She was older than Sophia had expected, her features a mix of Tom's. There was no mistaking the resemblance. Her eyes were bright, but there was a sadness there, a quiet sorrow that echoed in the way she carried herself. "I'm looking for Tom Larson," the woman said, her voice steady but filled with an undercurrent of emotion. "Is he here?" Sophia's heart pounded in her chest. She wasn't sure what she had expected, but this wasn't it. This wasn't just the daughter Tom had given up all those years ago. This was someone who had spent a lifetime without her father, someone who had lived with the weight of that absence. And now, here she was, standing in the doorway, asking for the very man who had kept her a secret for so long. Sophia stepped back, motioning for the woman to come inside. "He's here," she said quietly. "We've been expecting you." As the woman stepped inside, Sophia felt the room shift. She wasn't just welcoming a stranger. She was welcoming a part of Tom's past, a part of him that he had kept hidden for so long. She wasn't sure what would happen next, whether this would bring the family closer or tear them apart. But she knew one thing for sure: their lives were never going to be the same. Emily stood silently behind Sophia, watching the woman with cautious eyes. It was clear that she was still struggling with the idea of this sudden intrusion into their lives. But there was something else in her expression now, something that hinted at acceptance, if only just. Tom appeared at the top of the stairs, his face unreadable. When he saw the woman standing in the foyer, his expression softened. He took a tentative step forward, his eyes locked on hers. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence was thick with emotion, with all the years of distance, regret, and unresolved questions hanging in the air. Then Tom spoke, his voice raw with emotion. "You found me." The woman nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I had to know. I had to know who you were." Sophia watched as the two of them stood there, their connection undeniable. This was it, the test, the moment when everything would be decided. And in that moment, Sophia realized something. The family was broken, but it wasn't beyond repair. This was their chance, their ultimate test, and she was determined to see it through, no matter the outcome. The house felt quieter than it had in days, the weight of the past week hanging over every corner, every room. The silence was no longer uncomfortable. It was filled with a cautious hope, an understanding that after all the chaos, there was still a chance for something new, something that had seemed impossible just days ago. Sophia stood by the window, her gaze drifting over the estate that had been the center of so many memories, both happy and painful. The family was still recovering, still finding their way through the maze of secrets, betrayals, and the truth that had come to light. But for the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of peace. It wasn't the peace she had once imagined, but it was real, and it was the only kind she could hope for now. Behind her, she heard footsteps, light but purposeful. She turned to see Emily entering the room, her eyes still tired but with something softer in them. A new understanding, perhaps. The distance between them, the rift created by all the hidden truths, was still there, but it was no longer insurmountable. "Mom," Emily said quietly, her voice uncharacteristically gentle. I've been thinking. Sophia turned fully to face her, her heart skipping a beat. What about? Emily hesitated, then walked toward her, stopping just a few feet away. About Tom, about everything. Sophia's breath caught. What are you thinking, Emily? I don't know if I'll ever fully understand everything, but I'm starting to see why you did what you did, Emily said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. I don't agree with all of it, but I think I can forgive him, and I think I can forgive you too. Sophia blinked, feeling a wave of relief wash over her. She hadn't realized how much she had been holding her breath, waiting for Emily to come to this conclusion. The past few days had been a roller coaster of emotions, guilt, fear, anger. But now, Emily's words were the first real sign of healing. I'm sorry, Emily, Sophia said softly, her voice thick with emotion. I should have told you sooner. You shouldn't have had to carry that burden with me. Emily gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of her head. It wasn't just your burden to carry, but I get it now. We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do after. Sophia stepped forward, pulling her daughter into an embrace. The simple act felt like the beginning of something profound, something that would take time to build but would be worth every moment. As they stood there, holding each other, the weight of the past seemed to loosen just a little. The doorbell rang, its sudden sound jolting them out of their embrace. It wasn't the end of their journey, but it was a reminder that life kept moving forward whether they were ready or not. They had faced the storm of secrets, and now it was time to face the future. Sophia walked to the door, Emily following closely behind. As she opened it, she saw Tom standing there, his expression wary but determined. Behind him stood the woman, the child he had fathered all those years ago, now grown into a young woman with eyes full of hope and questions. The silence that passed between them was thick, charged with the weight of what had happened. Sophia knew this was the moment where everything would change, where the final piece of the puzzle would fall into place. The family wasn't whole yet, but this was the start of something new, a beginning. I'm glad you're here, Sophia said softly, her voice steady. Her eyes met Tom's, and she saw the weight of his past in his gaze, but there was also a glimmer of hope. It wasn't perfect. It never would be. But they had come this far, together. And that was enough. Tom stepped inside, his daughter following quietly behind him. Emily lingered in the doorway, her arms crossed, but her eyes were softer now. She wasn't ready to forgive him completely, but she was ready to try. And that was all anyone could ask for. I know this isn't easy, Tom said, his voice rough with emotion. I've made a lot of mistakes. I don't expect anyone to just accept me back, but I'm here, and I want to make things right. I want to be part of this family again. Sophia nodded, her heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. It wouldn't be easy, this path they were about to walk. There would be challenges, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But for the first time in a long while, Sophia felt a sense of hope she hadn't known she could feel again. As they all stood there, in the doorway of the home that had seen so much pain and joy, they knew this was only the beginning, a new chapter, one that would take time to write, but a chapter they could write together. Let's take it one step at a time, Sophia said, her voice firm but kind. But we'll do it together. The family, fractured but slowly mending, stood united in that moment. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, Sophia felt ready to face it. What do you think of Tom's choices and the secrets he's kept? Share your thoughts in the comments below. From 0 to 10, what's your score for this family drama? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to follow all our latest stories. And if you enjoyed this, check out more heartwarming tales by clicking here on the end screen.